It's my honor to introduce Paula, who is a great organizer that we have here in the Detroit community. So Paula is a popular educator and feminist from Chile. She's a founder of social justice organizations that fight for liberation for oppressed peoples. Paula is actively involved in the solidarity movement with Mapuche Indigenous struggles. She moved to Detroit in 2018, and since then she has joined different grassroots efforts to fight for dignity, respect, and permanent protection for all immigrants in the US, with a special involvement in Rapid Response Detroit and Cosecha. So welcome, Paula. Thank you for being here with us tonight, and I know you have a lot of great information to share with us. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much for the great presentation. It's like more than enough than me. And thank you for the invitation. I'm always happy to share my experiences and also to share about Chile that sometimes gets a little lost in the map, right? And I think it has a very interesting political and social experience to learn mostly about these days. So a couple of things. First, as you can know by listening, I am a Spanish native speaker, of course. I'm still learning English. So if you feel very lost with my pronunciation or even with my terms, I prefer to stop and rephrase or try to explain again. So please don't be shy to stop me. If the idea is that you can understand what I'm gonna say. And to make it a little easier for both sides, I'm gonna go probably reading my ideas so I don't get lost on the train of thought with my English. Okay, so I'm gonna go reading and probably going a little deep maybe. But so yeah, feel free. I think that the questions, I'm not sure if the questions for like more discussion are gonna be at the end. That's the idea? Okay, but maybe by section, if you really didn't get an idea or a term that seems important, I prefer to repeat or try to explain it better, please, so we can all go together through the content. I'm gonna go a little bit like a timeline, just to try to set up like a historical and social framework about the Chilean social and political movement and how we get here today, or how we are, you know, the reasons are and the processes that bring us to the Chilean days, the Chilean struggles today. So just a brief historical framework. Chile has been historically based on extractivism and foreign corporations' presence for the exploitation of natural resources, mostly mining, coal, saltpeter, copper, also forestry, imported imported plantations that are not native to the Chilean land. Also fishing. Chile is also known for being the first country that had a pacified via to socialism. This is the implementation of a socialist government through elections and voting, instead of an open revolutionary process like we saw in Cuba or Russia. So the government of Salvador Allende went in place since the 1970 to 1973. And that was called the government of the Popular Unity. And the Popular Unity was a coalition of political parties, a coalition of political and social movements that worked together to bring this idea of the government with a socialist approach in Chile. But in 1973, there was a coup d'etat, yeah, to set up the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet. Pinochet is a very known dictator, right? So his dictatorship was between 1973 and 1990. Of course, here's the US imperialism played a fundamental role in provoking, financing, and supporting the coup d'etat and the dictatorship itself. Henry Kissinger is a very known name in Chile. During these years, of course, a lot of political repression and violation of human rights, disappearances, executions, political prisoners without any trial, etc. Of course, this dictatorship also was included the suspension of Congress, the prohibition and banning of political parties, unions, and other social organizations. The concentration of power, or the executive power, was on a military government council, with the members, the heads of the Army, Air Force, Police Force, and Marine. But maybe the most crucial thing about this specific dictatorship, because we had at that time very dictators in Latin America, but one of the specific, and in my opinion, the most maybe relevant aspect of the Pinochet era is the implementation of a neoliberal revolution. Chile is one of the first countries that implemented in a very broad, deep, and aggressive way the neoliberal policies dreamed by Milton Friedman in the University of Chicago. So under Pinochet's ministries, a new social and economic system was implemented. In fact, the Pinochet's ministries were called, and are called today even, the Chicago Boys, because they studied here, right-wing guys, right? And they came to study here in the University of Chicago about the neoliberalism ideas. And they went back to Chile to implement all of these ideas of basically privatization of every, I think, human right, but it's the privatization of education, health, pension system, etc. All of these privatizations and this neoliberalism framework was hallowed and allowed and implemented by the Constitution of 1980 under Pinochet era. So all the privatization is hallowed in that constitution. This is very important to understand for what is happening today, that I'm gonna go there later. At the end of the 80s, right, due to the strength of the popular opposition movement, plus international lack of legitimacy, added to the fact that most of the neoliberal system was already implemented, Pinochet called to the plebiscite, which is basically an election between two things, yes or no. This was in 1988, and it was, yes, we want to keep the Pinochet government, or no, we don't want to keep the Pinochet government. A lot of people thought that they were going to, you know, make it a trick or a fraud or something. The dictatorship didn't. And the no won with like more than 80% of the electoral votes. So that meant that in the 90s, there was a transition to democracy. So Congress is reestablished, political parties are allowed again, elections for president are held, etc. However, the economic and social structural pillars inherited by the dictatorship are not touched at that time. So we have political democracy, right? and the different powers are established, like the legislative power, and mostly that one. But on the contrary, in the first, in the government under democracy, the neoliberal policies are even strengthened, perfected, and completed by the governments of the coalition of democracy. This means that Chile started to be one of the most unequal countries in the world. 100% of the Chilean families concentrate more than 30% of the Chilean wealth, for example. More privatizations, policies, more laws for privatization, education, health, pension system, water rights, electricity, communication system are implemented during these years. So with that in mind, like a framework, I'm gonna go a little bit with like bringing some pieces of different struggles. I have been involved with the Mapuche struggle, more like in solidarity, but also as living in Santiago, which is the capital, and not being by myself a Mapuche, but a mestiza, right? I have been also involved with other struggles. So I'm gonna talk about the Mapuche struggle, but also bring other pieces of the social movement in Chile. Any questions so far about understanding more than discussion itself? No? Okay. So the Mapuche indigenous struggle, yes, they are one of the most important indigenous groups in Chile and in Argentina, basically in the very south of the South America. And they are very important and significant, not only because of numbers and because they are still alive, but also because they were the most strong resistant to the Spanish conquistadores. Okay. So the Spanish conquistadores couldn't really destroy them like they did with other indigenous people in South America, right? In fact, the Mapuche people were able to establish like an agreement with the Spanish, with borders. And they say, okay, you can't pass this border. The border was a big, big river. So that's why I think, more than because of numbers, the Mapuche are historically very important. So they kind of keep one land. But later, Mapuche Indigenous have suffered more invasions from the Chilean people and the Argentinian people, the mestizos that were invading their lands and, you know, stolen their lands and with violence, just destroying their culture, their communities, and everything. So like how, like other many indigenous people around the world, right? They have been suffering for many, many, many years. But in the last 25 years, around the anniversary for the 500 years of the Colón in America, the Mapuche people in Chile and in Argentina too, they met in assemblies and they say, we are going to start to take back our lands. And by saying that, what they meant is actually taking back land where they can settle in again their communities, their harvest, but mostly their culture, right? Mapuche means gente de la tierra, which means people of the land. And their culture is understandable without the relation with land. So by saying we're gonna take back our lands, it's like we are gonna be an alive indigenous people again, right? So they started this process 25 years ago, in 1992 about, right? Hold on a second, I lost my notes. Okay, and the main demands or goals or purposes behind this process were autonomy and self-determination to decide how we want to organize, how our culture is, and how we, develop our culture. Return of stolen and lands, respect for their culture and social and political organization. And the horizon of the struggle is the autonomy and territory, cultural, social, political, and economic reconstruction of the Mapuche nation. They say we want the Mapuche nation in our lands, right? Since then, the response of the democratic governments have been permanent repression, intimidation of communities, including children, assassinations of Mapuche leaders, political imprisonment, criminalization of protests, and criminalization of Mapuche organizations, stigmatization in the media. I would say that before this process started to grow, right? The Mapuche were always under a racist system. When I was a kid, I was taught in the school that the Mapuche were thieves, drunk people all the time, lazy, right? Stinky. And so a lot of racism for the Mapuche people, and a lot of them migrated to the cities, but they were ashamed to say they were Mapuche. So they hide their last names, they hide their faces, right? So they were under a lot of discrimination and racism and bias and things like that. Of course, condemnation to poverty, and very dispersed within very small and unproductive lands. So when they started to recover this, they started to develop also a self-identity again, kind of being proud of being Mapuche. And that started to be something that they taught and teach to their children, right? So that's part of this process of recovering the land. And but instead of, well, the racism at that point, like discrimination like that, still is there, but new labels were added, right? They are terrorists, they are criminals, etc. That's what I mean by stigmatization in the media. Basically, terrorists and criminals. The governments since the 90s until today also work under impunity in violation of the Mapuche human rights. And this is in everything, every aspect. Repression in the communities, for example, in the middle of the night, occupation with police, with army. So if you go to the Mapuche land in the Araucanía and the communities, you can feel like, oh, this is a war zone, you know, because there is a lot of army, there is a lot of police, there is a lot of checking points for everything. They have been sending police and army in the middle of the night to the houses, but also to the schools. So you can believe like in a very poor school, just by wooden walls, being invaded by police and with rubber bullets and with tear gas, with children in elementary schools and stuff like that. So a lot of kind of bringing terror to the Mapuche people to try to break their spirit for fighting for their rights. Also, this has been along with a very hypocritical, I would say, international policies, because the governments have been signing international agreements and conventions about indigenous rights and things like that, and they have been very active in the United Nations and the Commission of Human Rights and stuff like that. But when back in the house, it's very different, the story that you can tell there. So it's very contradictory, and I think that the governments in the last 30 years have been very, if you want, smart in making an international image of protecting the human rights and being in the people's sides, but at the same time doing very different things within Chile and mostly with the Mapuche people. So I would say that the Mapuche struggle has advanced in recuperation of the social and spiritual organization in their communities, settlement of communities once dispersed and divided, recovery of their culture, identity, and pride or proud of being a Mapuche, put the problem on the national agenda again, and gain broad support from other social movements and working class sectors as well. The main strategy is direct action through the recovery of their lands. What does it mean? It means that in their historical lands, there are big landowners and forestry industry and rivers. So they have been recovering that by harvesting, by occupying the spaces, by other direct actions, sometimes sabotage of machinery and property, organizing all kind of protests, and also the legal, of course, the legal and the institutional struggle or tactics, if you want to, right? Like going to request permission to recover their lands, going to ask to the appropriate ministry to buy the land back for them, and things like that. But I would say that the main strategy is direct action through the recovery of their lands and different ways to do that. But there are also legal strategies to protect indigenous rights, to buy land back, etc. The Mapuche movement is not necessarily a passive or peaceful movement waiting for solution from the Chilean government. They are very proactive and based on territorial control and autonomy of the communities. I find a lot of, dots linked or related or similarities with the Ejército Zapatista de Liberación Nacional, the Chiapas, Mexico. I think there are some similar ideas in this idea of autonomy and territorial control. One of the clear or maybe more direct confrontations have been with latifundistas, we call them in Latin America, big landowners and forestry corporations, as well as hydropower electricity to feed the mining industry. So basically, when they try to recover their lands, the lands are in these hands. So this is actually a process that implies a confrontation with the state and the capitalist power people, right? Monocultive companies, big landowners that own not only land but also corporations and probably the richest families in Chile. So in this context is when it happened what it happened in the situation that it said in the invitation. So the Araucanía is like this war zone that I was talking about, and has become the main zone for conflict between Mapuche and these corporations and big landowners. This has been a process of also polarization, right? So what happened in August 1st in the Araucanía region, mentioned in the invitation, is just an example of the open battles between sectors. So what happened? Right wings attack with guns and Molotov bombs 4 mayoral offices that were occupied by Mapuche organizations demanding the liberation of Mapuche political prisoners. Some of these political prisoners were at the time carrying out a liquid hunger strike in Angol prison to demand compliance with Convention 169 of the ILO, which recognized indigenous people and their rights, but also they were pressing for the implementation of fair trials and the legal system to work fairly, but not against Mapuche most of the time. Because the Mapuche people have right now, and in the last 10 or 15 years, they have a lot of political prisoners, but most of them are just, and I didn't find the word for this. In Spanish is montaje, which is like a false and fake creative situation to incriminate someone who is innocent. But you incriminate them, creating a situation to make them guilty, right? And to condemn them and to keep them in prison or incarcerated. But what happened is that in Chile, you have also the anti-terrorist law that was mostly created for the Mapuche people. That is very unfair, and it's very like you need just one blind that you can know their identity witness to say, I saw this person doing this and that and blah, 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 blah. And that's enough to keep them incarcerated for starting a trial. But the problem is that this is called preventive prison. The problem with the Mapuche people here is that they suffer preventive prison for 2-3 years before starting a trial. And when the trial starts, there is not enough evidence to charge them for anything. So the case is discharged. But they already were in prison for 2-3 years with the damage for the person, for the family, for the community, and mostly for the struggle and the fear that this means, right? So the mama say, don't get in trouble because you are gonna end up in the prison, you know? So this is something that it's maybe one of the main focus for the solidarity, just to try to support the political prisoners and to make sure that they get a fair trial as soon as possible, right? So, but most of the time, Mapuche ended up released for lack of evidence. So it's just like, well, like a political prisoner, right? Just a punishment for thinking different, for standing up for your rights, but with no crime involved, real crime involved. So I'm gonna move from the Mapuche struggle to a couple of struggles before I don't know the time. I have been a long time. Okay, I'll keep it going. Any questions so far about, again, understanding, discussion for the end? No?
I have a question in the chat. I don't know, Rebecca, did you want me to read it or? So it says, does preventative prison only apply to Mapuche and not other citizens?
No, it applies to other citizens too. But yeah, we have other political prisoners in Chile. We have mostly, I would say, students in the fight for free education have been political prisoners. In the last, I'm talking about the last 20 years, maybe, right? Before in the dictatorship, there were a lot of political prisoners just for thinking differently, right? So, and now most from students or from the popular movement in the neighborhood, like there is a lot of territorial organizations and they suffer a lot of repression too. And I'm gonna go there for the uprising of the of last year, 2 years ago already, the 2019 uprising. We have now more than 2,500 political prisoners yet. Right now, today, as we speak, in Chile, which has a total population of about 80 million of people. So yeah, we have other kind of political prisoners. I'm gonna keep going. I'm gonna go back to the other political prisoners at the end. So another important piece of the social movement in the last years is the feminist struggle or the feminist movement. And this is not only a movement for breaking the glass ceiling, it has been very intentional in having an approach, an anti-patriarchal approach. And it has been very related since started to grow to the rest of the struggle and the popular movement, even since the dictatorship years. Women organized and led the first neighborhood protest against Pinochet, the first ollas comunes or padlock in times of hunger and starvation. So they put, you know, a fire on the street with a big pot and everyone brought whatever they can and they fed the neighbors or the neighborhood together. They also started the first human rights organizations under the dictatorship. So women were very, very active to bring down the dictator. And the feminist movement has been a key since then and also today, because in the last year, the feminist movement has strengthened and grows under the banners or under the main goals or pillars of against sexist violence, femicides, abuses, rapes, etc., for the right to free and safe abortion, and everything about sexual education, in the struggle to defend human rights in general, for the students, Mapuche, political prisoners, and lastly, the state violence of Piñera government during the social uprising of 2019. Another of the pillars have been the fight for better working conditions, recovering the strength of the unions and the transformation of the pension system, which is a very key thing that the dictatorship and the neoliberalism developed in Chile. The pension system is absolutely neoliberal, privatized, and a real robbery from the elite to the working class. I'm gonna go to that later too. So one idea or one example of how the feminist movement had been very kind of broad in the approach with the other more social, I don't know if social, but kind of the broad approach is some of the mottos that I felt like in Spanish they sound a lot better than in English, but still fight to reach a life that is worth living. That's one of the central mottos that have been on the process, on the movement the last years. Fighting until dignity becomes the normal. Strike against the precariousness of life. And this was a real strike that they called 2 years ago, and it was very successful. And this was not only productive, but also reproductive. So they can see when we don't take care of our children, or we don't cook at home, or we don't do other things that are invisible, right, to the labor market or to the productivity, well, the society doesn't work, right? Doesn't function well. And this is actually the horizon, a general strike, reproductive and reproductive, to make visible how important the role is, the woman roles, whatever the role they are playing is very crucial to the Chilean society. So I'm gonna touch a little bit about the pension system. It's called the No Más AFP movement. I'm gonna just write it here because it's very kind of weird. AFP is the acronym for the privatized pension system that we have in Chile. So this movement has also been growing by the last 10 years. And because the pension system is privatized, it is very, very cruel for the workers. So in average, only 20% of what any worker saves on his pension account goes back to the worker when retired. So you can believe you save an amount and only 20% of that goes back to you, and the 80% is just profit for the pension industry. In other words, also, the average pension you got is also around the 20% of the salary average you had in the 30 or 40 years of work. So if I had an average of salary of 1,000, I'm gonna have a pension about 180, $180. So it's just like crazy, the robbery, right? So the main demand here is return to a national public, or at least share private public system. And this has been also very important for the workers as a main demand that is cross-cutting to the different industries or the different places where you work, right? The students have been very active too. In 2006, high schoolers were defending public education against segregated national tests and education, demanding free secondary education and high quality for public education as well. In 2011, college students were demanding free secondary education. One of the focus is the end of the bank credit system for college students that condemned them to the world's highest debts, calculation of 30 years paying your undergraduate program debt. So everything, why I mentioned this, because I think that these different waves and these different kind of creeks come to a big river that allows what happened in 2019, the October Revolt. The October Revolt started with the subway high rate, with a, sorry, how you say, the rate of the subway went up by 40 cents. And high schoolers, which you say, it's not much. No, it's not, but it was just like the last drop for the frustration and the accumulation of, stress, frustration, and this sense of social injustice, because again, one of the most unequal countries, right? So high schooler called the ride free on the subways, skipping the tickets and jumping over the swivels. So the high schoolers started this process, but then the workers started to go to join them, and it was 1 week of it started like that, but it became a process of highly massive and combative protest, and it has two central elements. One, it begins as a social riot, but then takes the form of an uprising. So the riot to uprising, what I meant is like initially just frustration and anger, but become highly politicized, and all the demands that were on the air becomes to take form again and a shape, right? And an in-depth approach. So on one way, it's just like the drop that for the frustration, but in other ways, it's also the demand that had been accumulating in the people, right? So the social movement are kind of making a click in the people's minds, right? Oh yeah, the pension, oh the education, oh the inequalities, blah. So it's like everything comes together, and then the protests just keep going and going and going and going, and growing in numbers, and growing all over the country, and growing in diversity of people, and growing in diversity of expressions. And then Piñera government responded with brutal repression, stating that we are at war. And the war was the people in the streets, but all the people was on the streets. So the war was him against everyone else, basically. So he established a curfew and sent the army to control the protest. But this only polarized it and radicalized the movement even more. So millions took the streets under that and defied the curfew and defied the army. Since hitting the pots, like this. I don't have pictures, but I have like pa, 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 pa on the streets. Playing music together, blocking the streets, barricades, looting, damaging, or making arts in like a very, I don't know, symbols of the power, like statues, police stations, or whatever. Creativity, art, popular identity, multiple struggles and reasons for what demanding a social change. So it's like everything comes together. It lasts a lot. It was October, November, December. But at the end of November, all the demands and struggle combined have one big demand: changing the Pinochet constitution, because it was like clear that everything was connected with that, right? So real changes are unconstitutional under this framework. So the main demand, like the umbrella demand, was changing the Pinochet constitution. And at that time, Chile is getting very non-governable, protests keep growing, people don't go to work, there is no public transportation, so productivity is going down for the corporations, while repression and police and state violence results in more than 50 deaths, more than 400 people losing their eyes due to police bullets, not real bullets, the other that they use for,
Rubber.
Yes.
Rubber.
Thank you. So finally, the demand for a constitutional change is accepted by the power. President Piñera and the main political parties has get an agreement to take the initiative to avoid a more, the movement keep growing and growing. But the main demand, the radical demand for the constitution was a constitution via a constitutional assembly, popular, plurinational, and feminist. But this changed a little bit. So right now, there was a plebiscite last November in favor or against to develop a new constitution process. And more than 80% of the people voted in favor of a new constitution. We want a change. Also, there were two mechanisms. One was the Constitutional Convention, where 100% of the people who were going to work on the new constitution were new elected people, no currently politicians or representatives in the Congress. So they cannot be active appointed elected politicians. This won for 85% of the votes over a mixed convention, which was 50% of current lawmakers or politicians or representatives and 50% of new people. So basically this showed that the political class is very, has nothing to a little of legitimacy about real change, right? So what's happening today? Today we have 155 spaces to fill out for the Constitutional Convention. Right now, to date, as we speak, there is a campaign going on for the different candidates and coalition lists to these elections. The elections are going to be held in April 2009, next year, in April next year. And so just right now, the lists are confirmed because, you know, they go through a process and all of that. So there are a lot of lists from all the range of coalitions and political stances and approaches and everything to fill out 155 spaces for the members that are going to be in the Constitutional Convention, working for 1 year to rewrite the Constitution. So that is what is going on right now. Also, like I mentioned before, at the same time as we speak, we still have more than 2,500 political prisoners from the 19 uprising. But just today, real today, Monday 25, the Human Rights Commission of the House of Representatives passed an agreement to move forward a proposal for an amnesty for the political prisoners of the uprising, that they have been in preventive incarceration for more than 1 year already. And they were just people who was like joining the marches. I mean, any one of us may be one of them. And they are even minors under 18 years old and things like that. So it's not that they have churches or anything yet. Even they don't have sometimes not even a case. They have been waiting to start the trail. So yeah, this is where we are today.
Paula, thank you so much. That was wonderfully rendered. We really appreciate it. You have taken us from almost from the conquest to actually today.